fortaleza. Some failures remain small, forgotten within the steady churn of classified routine, but others.
The world's complexity could not always be untangled by logic or surveillance, for events often
In the
unfolded.
uneasy years after the Second World War, when victory felt fragile and new tensions stirred beneath the surface of triumph, America searched for certainty in an age shaped by shifting alliances and invisible threats that crept through borders with the silence of smoke. The Central Intelligence Agency, born from fear as much as strategy, emerged as the nation's shield, a clandestine guardian sworn to read the world's deepest intentions before they could ignite into disaster, promising leaders that hidden dangers could be tamed by hidden hands. Yet power carried expectations heavier than any official dared admit, for the agency soon discovered that omniscience was an illusion, and even the sharpest eyes could be blinded by assumptions, ambition, or the simple human hope that the world moved in predictable patterns. Inside rooms locked behind steel and secrecy, analysts spoke in careful tones, projecting confidence while privately wrestling with doubts that grew whenever intelligence points fractured into contradictions that no amount of reasoning could neatly bind into certainty. Presidents demanded clarity, allies demanded answers, and adversaries demanded nothing at all, content to let confusion do their work for them and weaving deception so subtle that even seasoned officers could mistake false signals for truth whispered through trusted channels. The public imagined the agency as a force operating with flawless precision, yet within its walls lay a different story, a story of rushed reports, missed clues, and quiet warnings lost beneath layers of bureaucratic noise that grew heavier as global tensions stretched outward. Some failures remained small, forgotten within the steady churn of classified routine, but others swelled into disasters that shook Washington's confidence, revealing cracks no leader wanted exposed, cracks that proved even the most powerful intelligence service had frailties. Officials learned that the world's complexity could not always be untangled by logic or surveillance, for events often unfolded with a chaotic rhythm untouched by strategy, leaving the agency reacting to storms it believed it could predict, yet never fully understood. Across continents, operations designed with meticulous precision unraveled for reasons no briefing had anticipated, reminding officers that human motives could shift like wind, and that even the smallest overlooked detail could transform certainty into sudden humiliation. These were the moments the nation never saw, moments where silence echoed through secure corridors as officers stared at maps newly stained by failure, knowing that the cost would linger not in headlines but in trust fractured among those sworn to guard the Republic. And as decades passed, one truth became impossible to ignore. The CIA's shadowed history was not defined solely by triumph, but by missteps buried deep within sealed archives, where each failure waited like a dormant wound, reminding America that even its protectors could falter. For in the world of intelligence, victory was fleeting, but embarrassment endured, engraved not in public memory, but in classified reports read only by those who understood that the greatest danger to a powerful nation was not its enemies, but the secrets it feared to face. Within the agency's inner circles, there existed a quiet understanding that some operations were doomed long before they began, undone not by enemies or sabotage, but by fragments of uncertainty ignored during planning, fragments that later expanded into the silent disasters no one wished to claim, yet everyone felt as an unspoken weight pressing upon the conscience of the institution. One such failure unfolded in a remote region where influence was believed fragile, a place where analysts predicted a swift outcome shaped by carefully cultivated alliances. Yet the human fabric of the area had been misread, leading local factions to shift loyalties with a complexity far beyond the agency's models, turning a confident plan into a chain of miscalculations. Agents in the field sent early warnings, subtle indicators that the political landscape was drifting in ways unforeseen. But those signals passed through layers of review where urgency was softened, reshaped by analysts unwilling to challenge assumptions baked into years of strategic thinking, creating a quiet momentum toward an outcome few were prepared to face. As the operation progressed, unexpected movements rippled through the region, alliances bending, promises dissolving, and rival groups forming coalitions the agency had not anticipated, revealing how little control truly existed over events shaped by local histories far older than any foreign assessment, histories written by generations whose motives no outsider could fully comprehend. Inside headquarters, the atmosphere grew tense, reports contradicting each other as field officers attempted to salvage a plan already unraveling, each message carrying threads of confusion that analysts tried desperately to weave into coherence. Even as leadership sensed the mission slipping beyond reach, pulled apart by forces no strategy could neatly or quickly repair. The unraveling accelerated when a key intermediary, believed loyal after years of quiet support, shifted allegiance in a moment shaped by personal grievances invisible to intelligence reports, reminding the agency that human decisions could pivot not from ideology or strategy, but from emotions layered beneath the surface of power, where fear, pride, and resentment intertwined. When the final collapse came, it arrived not with dramatic gunfire or exposed espionage, but with a simple broadcast from local leaders declaring their rejection of foreign influence. A message that rippled across the region and into Washington, exposing the operation's failure in a way no cover story could conceal, forcing officials to confront the depth of their misjudgment. In private rooms, senior officers reviewed the sequence of events with grim clarity, tracing how a few overlooked details, dismissed reports, flawed assumptions, cultural misunderstandings, had spiraled into a failure that weakened credibility and emboldened adversaries who used the moment to demonstrate that even America's secret hand could falter when misreading the human terrain. The aftermath proved it even more painful than the failure itself, for congressional committees requested explanations cloaked in diplomatic language, while foreign allies questioned whether the agency still possessed the precision it claimed, sparking quiet debates inside Washington about the limits of influence and the danger of believing foresight was ever absolute. Among the rank and file, the operation became a cautionary tale whispered during training sessions, a reminder that intelligence was not a science of certainty, but a fragile art shaped by intuition, humility, and the willingness to challenge one's own conclusions before history delivered its verdict with the cold indifference that haunted every miscalculated step. And so the agency carried the weight of this hidden embarrassment forward, filing the operation into classified archives where it joined a growing collection of lessons unspoken, proof that even the most powerful guardians of a nation could stumble when they believed the world would bend to their understanding rather than reveal its truths in its own deliberate, unforgiving way. As global tensions deepened and alliances shifted with quiet unpredictability, the agency turned increasingly to its analysts, believing that careful interpretation of scattered signals could prevent the next humiliation. Yet within those dimly lit rooms, the truth slowly emerged. Analysis itself had become a fragile instrument, vulnerable to bias, pressure, and the limits of human sight. Reports arrived from distant embassies, intercepted communications, economic shifts, and subtle political tremors, forming a vast mosaic no single mind could fully comprehend. And yet decisions were demanded with urgency, forcing analysts to build narratives from fragments that refused to fit neatly, leaving gaps filled by inference rather than certainty, a dangerous foundation for fate. One particularly haunting misjudgment began with a seemingly routine briefing about a rising movement believed too small to influence national stability, its members dismissed as scattered idealists with little structure or reach, a conclusion supported by years of data that appeared consistent but concealed an evolution occurring quietly beneath the notice of distant observers. Younger analysts raised concerns, noting that the group's language had shifted subtly towards strategic unity, but their warnings were softened in final summaries, overshadowed by the agency's long-standing belief that such movements imploded under their own contradictions, a belief rooted more in institutional memory than in the rapidly changing reality unfolding on the ground. When the movement surged unexpectedly, gaining supporters across rural regions previously deemed stable, the agency scrambled to reassess. Yet its newest reports contradicted older assumptions so sharply that leadership hesitated to act, uncertain whether the shift represented genuine threat or simply noise amplified by sources eager to appear more informed than they truly were. As days passed, political momentum grew in ways that puzzled even local officials, revealing how deeply the agency had underestimated the grievances that fueled the movement. Grievances woven through years of economic decline, cultural tension, and unaddressed fears, all elements dismissed as irrelevant by analysts who trusted their models more than the voices echoing from the ground. By the time Washington acknowledged the scale of the miscalculation, the movement had already shaped elections, altered regional power structures, and inspired neighboring groups to follow similar paths, creating a cascading shift that left allies bewildered and adversaries quietly celebrating the agency's failure to foresee the political storm building in plain sight. Inside headquarters, the atmosphere grew somber as internal reviews exposed the roots of the mistake: outdated assumptions, over-reliance on old data sets, and the subtle pressure to deliver answers that aligned with policy expectations, not with the uncomfortable truths rising from field reports that had been overlooked, misunderstood, or prematurely dismissed. Some veteran analysts admitted privately that the failure stemmed from a deeper flaw: the belief that human societies moved in predictable cycles, when in reality they were shaped by emotion, memory, and sudden collective resolve, forces no algorithm could fully capture, especially when filtered through layers of bureaucracy that dulled the urgency carried in early warning signals. The embarrassment deepened when foreign partners requested clarifications the agency could not provide, questioning how a nation with such vast intelligence resources had missed a movement that its own people had sensed months earlier, leaving Washington to confront the uncomfortable truth that insight required humility, and humility had long been overshadowed by confidence. Thus, the failure entered the agency's quiet history, preserved not in public accounts, but in confidential lessons circulated among analysts who understood that the greatest danger lay not in the unknown, but in believing one already knew enough, a belief that echoed through halls still haunted by the realization that even the sharpest minds could misread the human heart. In the dim corridors of intelligence history, there exists a category of failure so delicate and so deeply buried that even seasoned officers speak of them with lowered voices, as though the walls themselves might remember. For these were not missteps born of miscalculation alone, but moments when the agency confronted the limits of human perception, courage, and truth itself. One such moment began with a single defector whose appearance seemed almost providential, a figure arriving from across hostile borders with stories that shimmered with the allure of revelation, offering secrets about adversaries long thought impenetrable, secrets that promised to shift the balance of power if the agency dared to trust what he claimed to carry. At first, the interrogations unfolded with quiet confidence, each detail aligning neatly with known fragments of foreign operations, creating the illusion of coherence that analysts craved. Yet beneath that tidy surface, a subtle unease took root, for the defector spoke with polished fluency, as if reciting a script crafted not from memory, but from careful rehearsal. Some officers sensed the danger early, noting how his narrative mirrored the agency's existing fears too perfectly, echoing what leaders already suspected, as though tailored to confirm the very beliefs that had shaped policy discussions behind closed doors. Yet no one wished to be the voice of doubt when the promise of breakthrough hovered tantalizingly close. As weeks passed, the agency built strategies around his claims, drafting reports for senior officials who saw in him a rare chance to pierce the world of their greatest adversary, and slowly the defector's words became woven into national briefings, influencing decisions that reached far beyond the small room where his interviews continued with growing intensity. But then inconsistencies emerged, minor at first, then increasingly difficult to ignore. Details that shifted subtly between sessions, timelines that no longer aligned, and references to operations that surveillance failed to corroborate, cracks forming in a foundation many had already accepted as unshakable, cracks threatening to expose a dangerous illusion. A small group of analysts launched a discreet review, tracing each claim through archives and field reports, uncovering contradictions buried beneath layers of assumed truth, and slowly they realized the magnitude of the deception. The defector had been a fabrication, a carefully constructed instrument sent not to reveal secrets, but to distort the agency's vision entirely. By the time the truth surfaced, policies had already shifted, resources had been quietly redirected, and relationships with foreign partners had strained under the weight of flawed briefings that shaped weeks of strategic choices now revealed as responses to shadows crafted by adversaries who understood how deeply the agency hungered for insight. Inside headquarters, the revelation cut deeper than embarrassment. It pierced the core belief that training, instinct, and vigilance could shield the agency from manipulation, proving that even institutions built on skepticism could fall prey to narratives designed with surgical precision, narratives that played not on ignorance, but on the desire to finally understand. The defector vanished into custody, his usefulness dissolved, while senior officers debated how such a deception could have threaded itself so elegantly through their defenses, leaving behind a haunting realization that intelligence failures were not always born from lack of information, but sometimes from possessing information that felt too right to question. And so the event entered the agency's secret archives, a lesson etched quietly into the culture of intelligence work, reminding every new officer that the most dangerous enemy was not always the one hidden across distant borders, but the one who arrived bearing truth shaped precisely to reflect the fears, hopes, and assumptions the agency carried within its guarded halls. In the quiet aftermath of the deception, the agency found itself standing before an unsettling mirror, forced to confront not only the failures scattered across its hidden past, but the uncertainty that hung over its future, for each embarrassment carried whispers of a truth few wished to acknowledge. That power expanded much faster than the wisdom required to wield it. Reviews were lineaged behind sealed doors, committees assembled with solemn expressions, each tasked with untangling the consequences of decisions built upon illusions. Yet even as reports circulated through the upper floors, a deeper question lingered, whether the agency had lost something essential, an instinct that once guided it through the darkest corridors of conflict. Senior officers gathered in dim conference rooms, studying timelines littered with errors, attempting to determine at which precise moment skepticism had given way to hunger, and how a single fabricated voice had steered an entire institution off course, exploiting weaknesses no technology or protocol had ever been designed to protect against. Some argued for stricter oversight, insisting that the failures of the past decade revealed structural flaws too dangerous to ignore, while others warned that excessive scrutiny would cripple the speed required to counter emerging threats, turning intelligence work into a labyrinth of hesitation that adversaries would eagerly exploit without mercy. Yet beneath the debates lay a quieter understanding, shared only among those who had served long enough to see history repeat itself, that the agency's greatest vulnerabilities were never the enemies beyond its borders, but the blind spots formed by its own desire for control, a desire that had grown stronger with each conflict, each breakthrough, each secret obtained. As months passed, new recruits arrived, eager, idealistic, unaware of the failures whispered in training rooms. But veterans watched them with a mixture of hope and unease, recognizing that every generation entered believing they could see more clearly, unaware that clarity itself was often an illusion crafted by the very shadows they hoped to illuminate. Whispers circulated about reforms meant to prevent future missteps, though these changes were themselves wrapped in secrecy, known only to a few who understood that transparency could never be fully embraced by an institution tasked with guarding truths too volatile for public view, truths that carried consequences far beyond political fallout. The world outside shifted as new adversaries rose, each more complex than the last, shaped by technologies that blurred borders, identities, and motives in ways no previous era had encountered. And once again, the agency found itself reaching into unfamiliar territory, seeking patterns hidden within chaos, patterns that might determine the shape of decades. But even as operations resumed and strategies evolved, the failures remained, quiet, uncomfortable, persistent, etched not only into classified archives, but into the memory of those who had witnessed the cost of misplaced certainty, a reminder that intelligence was less a science of prediction than a fragile conversation with the unknowable. Some nights, senior officers walked the halls long after the lights dimmed, pausing before portraits of predecessors whose legacies were equal parts triumph and regret, seeing in their solemn faces the same burden they now carried, the weight of knowing that the agency would always operate in a world where perfect knowledge was a myth whispered in training. And though reports eventually faded and committees dissolved, the question asked quietly in the wake of each failure continued to echo, an unresolved whisper threading itself through generations of analysts, operatives, and directors. Whether the agency protected the nation from danger or merely postponed dangers it would one day have to confront. In the end, The agency moved forward as it always had, neither broken nor absolved, but suspended in the half-light where truth and uncertainty intertwined, shaping a legacy that would never be fully known to the public. A legacy kept alive in the shadows where victories remained unnamed and failures lingered like ghosts refusing to be forgotten. For in the world of secrets, nothing ever ended cleanly. Each lesson carved into silence, each misstep echoing beyond its time, reminding those who listened that even the most powerful institutions could falter, and that somewhere, deep within the archives, lay stories still waiting to surface. Stories that, once revealed, might reshape history again.